who has worked both within the sector and within government. So I think Caroline will give us those perspectives. Matthew has commissioned the work. Matthew is the Deputy Director at the Bearing Foundation, and of course it's a foundation, so I will only say nice things about it, because we are of course independent. But more importantly, the Bearing Foundation have run a programme on independence for a number of years, so I think Matthew can also offer a different perspective. And then finally, Chris Bath from Unlock, who is their Director of Operations and Development, is a practitioner. So what I think it's important in debates like these is that we actually get the experience of someone who's actually living and working the issues that we sometimes are theoretically talking about. Okay. What I suggested, we've got about an hour, maybe just a little bit more. I'd like Matthew to kick us off, and I've said to all the speakers that they've got a maximum of 10 minutes each, but if we can slim it down a little bit, that would be good. One very final thing, if you're interested in these things, where the debates that we're having, we're spreading them wider through social networks, and in this case Twitter. So if you know what Twitter is and you know what a hashtag is, under Research Conference 11 we've got someone in the audience who is going to be tweeting about the debate as it happens. Okay? We may even get questions from outside. Matthew.
Thanks. Should I stand?
Whichever you prefer.
I can't see you really in fact. So the mission statement of the Bearing Foundation sets out very clearly our belief in the importance of an independent and an effective voluntary sector. And you may be familiar with Speaking Truth to Power, a report that Julie Unwin produced for the Foundation in 2002. Now, our grants programme on independence, which we've run since 2006, has specific reference to government, but of course the issue of independence goes much wider than that. But that programme grew out of a discussion amongst our trustees in 2005 about the nature of the relationships between government and the voluntary sector. And one view amongst trustees was that the nature of the relationship was being changed irrevocably. And another view was that it's much more dynamic than that there are ebbs and there's flows, some organisations are faring better than others, relationships are taking different forms in different times and different circumstances, and all of that reflects centuries of the way in which power has shifted between the state and citizen action. So the conclusion was that whilst working with government was certainly seen as a potentially perilous enterprise, as Nicholas Deakin's phrase, it was also a necessary enterprise. The question then was about the terms of the engagement, how these respect and as far as possible secure the legitimate interests of both government and the sector without distorting their different roles. And of course the theme that underpins all that is independence. And we found it quite useful throughout the programme to think about independence as being about freedom. Freedom from undue external influence and control, and freedom to uphold purpose and values and to speak out. And exploring independence then is inevitably about exploring power, about relationships and about resources. And one of the questions that Carr asked me to think about was, does independence matter? And a few years ago I heard a senior sector figure saying that he thought worrying about independence was barking up the wrong tree. That reflects different views, that at best independence is a diversion from getting on with the job, and at worst it's actually rather self-indulgent navigated, but of course I very strongly disagree with that. The freedoms of voluntary action are of pivotal importance to what we do, how we do it, and how well we do it. Independence gives us the freedom to challenge, to be a channel for dissent, platform for influence, to identify new needs, and to be there for people who need to hold government to account. And to do all of that in the face of potentially in the face of statutory indifference, or in some cases active resistance. In short, it's part of the sector's ability to be different, and organisations that are captured or owned or who allow their agenda to be dictated to by others cannot be different. Beyond those issues, there's the sense in which public trust in and public support for charities is partly based on a belief that they take their own independent decisions about how to promote their beneficiaries' interests, and that they don't operate as the tools of any other agency or interest group, whether or not that's statutory or otherwise. So the sector has a right and has a duty to set its own course, and as Beveridge put it, to ensure that voluntary action has a will and a life of its own, and therefore independence matters. And so as a foundation that was running an organisational development grants programme, we asked how might you use a programme like that to help organisations to strengthen their independence from government. And we've written about this recently in the VSSN journal, and we're going to be publishing something later this year as well, but here's a very, very brief summary. So at the start of the programme, organisations presented a range of pressures on their independence from public funders, and that was reducing, and demonstrated the ways in which that was reducing their freedom to operate. And Cathy Farrow wrote up an analysis of the 500 applications that we got for the programme. It's called Sources of Strength. The next grants that we gave, we saw they helped organisations to carry out organisational development that strengthened different aspects of their infrastructure and gave them new resources. Organisations then set about consciously using those resources, very consciously, very energetically, in the pursuit of their independence. It seemed to us from reviewing the grants that there were a set of particular resources that were most useful. One was improved systems and skills for monitoring, evaluation and learning. Improved negotiation skills, communication tools were very significant. Improved capacity and skills in building relationships was very significant, as was improved processes for demonstrating accountability, and also improved strategic planning. The most significant of all the things that happened was that organisations had the time and made the effort to reflect on and to value independence. I think that was the most significant element of the whole programme. Organisations that gave time to reflect and value on independence, that was the mechanism that prompted them, that spurred them, and that sustained them to develop those resources and then to use them for their independence. And when they did that, we saw it had very significant effects on the nature of the relationships that they were having with their public funders. That meant that relationships became more honest, more open, and ultimately more productive. And in some cases, looking at it from the other side, it enabled people in government who worked honestly with the sector for the best outcomes for people in their areas. It enabled those people to work better as well. And we saw that improvements then in the organisation's strength and its relationships with its funders resulted in better outcomes for users and lots of other positive effects. Now that's very, very brief, and the report addresses some of the sort of evaluation challenges that there's a story like that necessarily entails, but I'll leave you to the report to do that. So overall, what I think we saw was that grants helped to create resources that strengthened the resolve and the teeth of these organisations. Much of what they did with those resources was to resist. But importantly, what they did from that was to engage with government in different ways that were ultimately better for the people that they're there to support. And it's right, of course, we point out that beneath those working relationships between people in government and people in sector organisations, there are deeper trends. Privatisation is one of the titles of one of the sessions that's been here at the conference. The whole the way in which we see needs increasing, at the same time the public funding is decreasing, and the whole way in which government itself thinks about independence. I've got some nice or rather striking examples of current government thinking on independence that I might share if I've got time later. We've found it quite productive with the independence programme to look at one particular part of the sector, and so for the last 3 years we've been working with the advice sector. And certainly one implication of the way in which government is currently moving in its relationship with the advice sector is to dismantle the structures and the services that citizens have to get independent support to secure their legal rights. And as a result, we've seen our approach develop from supporting organisational development in the sector to, alongside that, supporting campaigning and policy work. Now, to finish then, I've got 4 research questions which I wonder might help to take this, or be there to explore this issue further. So, I think what we've contributed with this grant programme is a bit of thinking and some experience about what resources organisations can develop to be stronger in their relationships with others. And I wonder whether or not there are more questions coming out of that. Thinking more widely about the resources that are available to the sector, we all know about the challenges of the compact, but beyond that, what's the role of law in strengthening the position of the sector? So I think some of the work of the Public Law Project, the whole area of public law, is very interesting. How might that be developed? And I wonder whether or not it might be productive also to look at how independence is protected in other parts of society. So the obvious example is the judiciary, which puts the greatest importance on its independence. And what are the structures, the cultures, the regulation and the law that are relevant there, and what could the sector learn from that? Then I think there's a whole strand around